Hi guys, welcome to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host, as always, Steve Hall, and today I'm very happy to have three lovely women with me. We're going to be discussing something super important, and that is female fat loss. I think a lot of the discussion just in the fitness industry in general is surrounded by just males' interpretations and kind of male directed information. And so I think it's super important to have a resource for females and to identify the differences, because women aren't just small men. So there are some unique things about them. So to introduce everyone so people are aware, we have Laurin Conlin back on the show. I actually interviewed Laurin back in ages ago, actually. It was like 2017. It was episode 74, and I had a shaved head and everything. I checked it back. So she is finally back on the show. Should have been back on before now, but she is an MS in exercise science. She's a coach and owner at Team Loco Fit. She's an IFBB Bikini Pro herself. And then we have Hattie Boydle. Is that correct? Boydle.
Yeah.
So we have Hattie Boydle on the show as well. She is a WBFF pro and also an online coach. And hopefully a lot of our followers or the listeners to the podcast are aware of you guys as well. And then we have Holly Baxter on the show as well. So she is an MS in dietetics, also WBFF pro, and obviously kind of co-owning things with Lane at BioLane and doing a lot of fantastic work over there as well. So I don't know who wants to start, but I'm going to pick someone to start talking about kind of the kind of grounding in terms of calories. Obviously, that's one of the things I think everyone here will agree on. We need a calorie deficit to start losing weight and body fat. But what might be the difference for a man and a woman? What kind of things do we need to look at? So I don't know if Holly, you want to kick us off with kind of identifying kind of what's an appropriate kind of calorie deficit to get female in, maybe talk about rate of loss.
So when it comes to fat loss, I don't think there are any real significant differences between men and women when it comes to kind of working out what your targets are going to be. But I think women are generally going to be starting from probably a slightly higher body fat percentage than men. So I guess when it comes to planning out your fat loss phase, there's probably going to be a longer time frame in which we need. As far as how much weight we should be losing, I tend to keep clients within a pretty set range, just to help with some of the protective mechanisms of metabolic adaptation and losing lean body mass. So based on the current consensus of the scientific literature, I think working somewhere between a range of like 0.4% of your body weight, maybe up to 1.2, maximum 1.5% of your total body weight per week is probably a really good place to start. And unfortunately, I think us ladies, we tend to be very impatient and we want that body fat gone like right now, just go. And we tend to jump in, and commit to these really aggressive, fat loss phases and, restrictive calories, crazy amounts of exercise. And more often than not, that's pretty much going to be unsustainable. So I think going in with more of a conservative approach so that it can be something we can carry out for a long period of time, and it's going to have those positive metabolic benefits, and it's going to help us preserve more of our total lean body mass if we can do it like that. So that's, I guess, the overview of how I would start somebody's fat loss journey. Girls, I don't know if you wanted to add anything more specific about it.
I'll go. So one thing that I think is important, like you said, Holly, is particularly for women, we're already smaller generally to start. So we're going to have less muscle mass, right? It's just going to kind of be the reality. And we're trying to maintain as much of that as possible. And, particularly when we're talking about a natural athlete, it's going to be something that's a lot slower versus, let's say, an enhanced male. So when you're looking at like these differences, you have to really take that into consideration. Of course, typically women are going to have less to lose, but not always, right? So we have to really look at that and understand, okay, big picture, how long is this going to take? And yes, it might be a little bit longer than we'd like. And I think just having those conversations up front with clients, like, listen, if you want to compete, here's like the trajectory the next year I see us going, right? Like, it's not just like 12-week prep, get on stage in 8 weeks. Now, are there people who do that? Certainly. Are there people who naturally are leaner than others? Certainly. But for the majority of female clients outside of the very, very top elite, they're going to need probably a longer timeline. One thing that I've kind of changed over time actually is when somebody's starting and they have a higher body fat, they're going to be able to maintain their muscle a little bit easier than later on when they are leaner. So when I first started coaching, or even my own preps, I would start off like, okay, I'm going to drop my food. I'm going to have 2 refeeds. I'm going to do them back to back. So I'm going to do this whole thing. And then over time, you have to get aggressive at some point and drop things off. But what I actually tended to realize is that it didn't work as well for people when I did the inverse. So when I start off, I'm generally a little bit more aggressive now with clients. They might have a refeed. If I've worked with them before, they might have 2 still, but some people can't tolerate that, especially in the beginning of a diet. And I've just found that initial kind of kickstart, if you hammer things a little bit harder in the beginning, again, when they have higher body fats and their mental resiliency and their willpower is a little bit higher, because when you're starting a diet, you're pretty excited.
Yeah, so higher motivation.
Yeah, you're much more dialed in. Let's get a little bit more aggressive. And then later on in the back end, let's add a refeed. Let's add 2. Let's do a diet break. And I generally have been finding that more people respond better that way, because I coach mostly women and only female competitors. So I can speak from that experience from coaching and with myself too. So I don't know if you guys do that, but it's something that I've found generally works better psychologically and physiologically. So it's kind of a win-win.
Yeah, absolutely. I would 100% agree with that, Laurin. I think just to kind of paint the backstory of that, when we have more fat tissue or adipose tissue, when we're dieting, we're less susceptible to protein breakdown. So the leaner we get, now there's less caloric cushioning or energy coming from our, stored body fat. So now, I guess the natural inclination is for our body to start wanting to use some of those other energy reserves, like our protein, like our lean body mass, to provide us with the fuel for our training. So I'm so there with you, Laurin. I think that starting, a bit more aggressive on the front end, and when you have that mental resilience, and then, adding in stuff at the later parts to kind of slow it down and help protect your lean mass is a great strategy.
Yeah, I think that sprint finish, especially in a contest prep, it's like not a fun time. You want to be ready early if you can be, if anything, because like you said, you've kind of got the ability to do that at the start. I was going to ask Hattie if you've a similar experience with what these guys are saying, but I guess because like you said, women are generally smaller, kind of the calories they consume is less. So being in a big deficit, even at the start, could sometimes be challenging to lose at the rate of loss they want to. Hattie, have you found kind of you've had to do things differently for women? Maybe, I don't know what that might be, like cardio, things like this?
It actually depends on the individual. And I think something that's really important is to set a plan with the individual. What I've found works really well with women is being able to tie them into each phase of the process so that they know where they're going, some sort of plan and some sort of direction, rather than springing things on them. Because it's like, when motivation drops, emotions set in, you're hungry, you're tired, knowing what's ahead just makes it that little bit easier. Is there going to be a diet break? If you're going aggressive in the beginning, just saying we're not going to go lower than this, we're just pushing now, we're going to get this set point, as body fat drops, refeeds can come in. This is the point where we're going to add cardio in. And I even put like cardio in, in the work capacity stage to build work capacity. So often I taper off cardio and then I might add it in through the end, but it all depends on the individual and their starting point. Time is our friend, and it is also not our friend. And that's why I think it's really important to set a realistic time frame, in particular with contest prep girls, because it isn't 16 weeks and it's not 12 weeks. But even for our lifestyle coaches, having a holiday at the end or a birthday at the end, or even just tying them into little pockets where they can just have a mental break, just helps that ongoing process. Because sometimes it is, a year's worth of fat loss, and a year's worth of fat loss sounds very scary to me. And I can only imagine what it would be like going, for the person going through it. So I think planning ahead is really important, and buying them into the process so they know what the result of their actions are going to be. And it makes it a lot easier to follow through.
Yeah, I think for people that have OCD or just like to be organized and they have a bit of a calendar, like going through, like if you're planning to compete especially, and I mean, it goes the same for people that are just, Gen Pop that just are trying to lose some body fat, kind of having that discussion on the front end, like what events have you got coming up? Is there any like meaningful or important dates where, hey, we can insert these week diet breaks or, a handful of higher calorie days, so that they've got something to look forward to. It's not, like you said, girls, it sprung on you at the last minute. That's so valuable. I think people really like having something to kind of project and see.
And it sounds...
sorry.
I knew it was going to happen. I was like, damn it, I'm trying to everybody's, but communication strategies with females, I think is really important. And I do work with males, and obviously I have a lot of male friends, and, there are differences, and, you can tell a male client, hey, go do this. And they're like, okay. Like, it takes a little bit, what I've always seen is it takes a little bit longer for them to buy into something, but when they're bought in, they will execute on it. Doesn't matter what's going on. Whereas females often tend to be really quick to jump on something, but then maybe it's harder to follow through, or there's like, well, what about this? And what? So that's where I find that communication is really, really important. And every communication style is going to be different for clients, right? Some, obviously we all have our very distinct styles, but we have to adapt and mold to each individual client. For some people, I'm much more of a cheerleader than for other people. Sometimes I'm that only person in their life that's very direct and strong with them. So it really just kind of depends. And that's where, you learn, if you ask the right questions and you communicate properly, you can see what works for them. But laying out that plan for any kind of a fat loss deficit is really, really key. And just having these little kind of mental sprints, like, all right, for the next few weeks, we're going to do this, and then we're going to adjust. And I think that's probably what the hardest part about particularly contest prep is there's a lot of uncertainty. Obviously we can be aiming for something, right? Like, hey, there's a show I really want to do. And hopefully, the more advanced you get, you can really dial these things in. But for somebody who's just starting out competing, it can be really hard as a coach to give a timeline, because it's like, listen, I really don't know how your body's going to respond. You're still relatively new to competing. It's really hard with that uncertainty to be like, well, what are we going to do next? And when is this going to change? And it's like, and I've even experienced that myself, when I was competing, it's like, you can't plan. And then I would have to say, okay, wait, as a coach, you can't plan this stuff. You have to just say, okay, let's execute this. And it might be 3 days later, check in, let me know how it's going. Right. But sometimes that's all the client needs to hear is, all right, we're going to try this, and then we'll reassess after these next week or these next few days.
I think just something on that is that there's many strategies, right? So, we've talked about refeeds and just briefly on diet breaks, but, for some women, teaching them that they've got a calorie budget over a week, and it's not just over a day, right? So they can learn to, if you're looking at sustainable fat loss, and this is for competitors and this is for general population, is what are the strategies that we can use if something goes wrong? Like, if we screw up over here, what's the repair system? And I always teach my girls, like, we have a repair system. Let's use it. So it's not all or nothing, because I think where a lot of, in particular lifestyle clients break down and they never end up reaching that end goal is that it's all or nothing. And it's great when it's all, but it's awful when it's nothing. And so is there a repair system that we can teach them to have a little bit more flexibility, right? There's multiple ways to the same destination. Is it that you do higher feeding days, with lower feeding days to match out your calorie budget over a week, so you're still hitting your target fat loss? Are you someone that just wants flatline macro calories for the week that you can just, make it a little bit easier for yourself? Is it 5 low, 2 high? Like, there's so many ways to do it. But just knowing and teaching our clients, I think, education is so important about there's more than one way to skin a cat, and there's different strategies that we can use. And if this fails, then we've got this plan. And I think, Holly, you're quite big on that as well, with having higher and lower feeding days. And,
absolutely. I think
behaviors.
I have definitely come from a background of disordered eating. I suffered terribly as a young teenager from anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder, and that stayed with me for probably 10 years of my life, certainly the binge eating disorder and bulimia. And it took a lot to kind of overcome that. And one of the troubles, I think, with dealing with that or kind of living that was that there was always this expectation that everything needed to be perfect. And I needed to have all those, I's are dotted, cross your T's, and if it's not perfect every single day, then my response to that was, okay, well, it's like you've punctured a tire and now I'm going to go puncture all the tires, but it didn't really need to be quite such an extreme response. So I think over the years, I've definitely learned to be a little bit more compassionate and kind to myself. And of course, the more knowledge that you have about how, energy balance works. And like you said, Hattie, making sure that you have an understanding that, day-to-day fluctuation probably isn't the worst thing. It's more about, 7-day energy balance. That really kind of was an eye-opening, huge turning point for me as an individual. And that's certainly something that I really try to help my clients understand when they are first starting up. And especially, there is so much misinformation out there. Like, how many crazy diets are there at the moment? Like, I don't know. There's so many. And they're all quite rigid. So I think giving people that permission to be flexible and know that, you don't have to hit this dead on, like within a gram of your target. And if you don't, you've failed. There is that repair process. I like that word. I haven't thought of it that way before, but yeah, I think there's a little bit more leniency than we probably, think.
Yeah.
I really love this discussion because it shows me that you're all great coaches, because it's the plan, it's the education for the client, it's giving them self-efficacy so they know kind of what we're doing, why it's working, and that just leads to better adherence, also in my experience. Something I'm also interested in, and I wonder if you guys would agree, it sounds like potentially when you are coaching a woman for fat loss, not to say I've never coached women for fat loss, but I think you guys are way more experienced with this, so you might have a different experience with kind of what I'm asking here, but they come from maybe a background of trying many more diets and have failed many other times. And so their kind of perception's a bit more kind of, screwed. Whereas a guy is kind of like, they're just like, oh yeah, calorie deficit totally makes sense. Whereas women sometimes feel a bit confused and like, oh no, I've tried that one before. Or it sounds like there needs to be some convincing almost for them.
There's a much more emotional response to food with women. I'm somebody who grew up with an eating disorder as well. I would say that a lot of clients, a lot of people who are in this space in general have come from that kind of a background. And it's not just the disorder in particular, it's the type of people that are drawn to have a disorder. They have a very particular set of personality traits. So while somebody might not have a full-blown eating disorder, those traits can still show us some disordered eating. And that's also who typically is drawn to these really extreme things like bodybuilding, because obviously if you're somebody who is a perfectionist and type A, and if this leaks into your food and your training, like, of course, it's the perfect outlet. You know what I mean? So most people who are having trouble sticking to a diet aren't like, I'm going to become a full-time competitor. Like, it's mostly the people who are very neurotic. And that's okay. You just, as a coach, you have to learn how to manage that and manage their neuroses. Obviously, if somebody has an active eating disorder, they should not be doing a competition. That needs to be very, very clear. But that doesn't mean that people don't still suffer from some disordered eating stuff without it being a full-blown eating disorder. And that's what we really have to work through as coaches, because again, there is such an emotional tie with food, in particular with women, because like you said, Steve, most of these people have been dieting for a long period of time. I mean, I started calorie restricting. I didn't really know what it was, but reducing my intake at 8 years old. I'm 28. You know what I mean? So like most people over the span of their life, 5, 10, 20 years, have been trying diet after diet after diet where they've had these eating disorders. So you can't expect them to come into this and not have an issue, particularly when we're talking about a competition, a physique competition that is based on what you look like, not some other kind of measurement. It becomes very, very blurry, because now this is not just how you physically look. This is somebody is judging me. And now if you don't have the right mindset around what a competition should be, you're going to really have some issues afterwards. And that's probably the most common thing I see. And I'm sure you guys see it too. On top of, after you've dieted really aggressively, your body is not in the best place, we'll put it that way. So there's a lot physiologically and psychologically happening, in particular for the female who does a bodybuilding competition.
I think if I was to reflect back on the reasons for why I got into bodybuilding, it is 100% to do with my body composition. And it was a way for me to exercise that, type A, I can do this perfectly. This is going to be a great sport for me. But, having kind of moved beyond the competitive world, I mean, I competed last in 2019 and I haven't done any shows in 2020. I took a break, and probably for the better, considering we just had COVID and all those struggles. But I think in reflecting on that, I have grown so much as a person, because it's given me an opportunity to now work on my psychological health. And the more reflection I've done and the more work I, even as a professional in this industry, has done working with a specialist in psychology, specifically food psychology, I realized there was a lot of stuff that I was kind of carrying with me during those years of competing. So I think something that really kind of needs to be brought into this sphere with competitors is the reality versus expectation, particularly when it comes to post-show. So, everybody that competes, obviously they're very hard workers. They can get into the shape that they need to be competitive. But then what happens after that? How does that person then feel with the potential weight regain and the increases in body fat? Do they have the mental skill sets to be able to cope and deal? So, compassion and body awareness, positive self-image, like all of these things, a lot of people just completely disregard. It's like, nope, I'm going to be lean forever. It's fine. But at some point in your life, beyond being a competitor, like there is going to be something else. So what happens then when you do stop? How are you going to handle all of those new feelings that, being uncomfortable at a little bit of a higher body weight? So I think something that definitely needs to happen more, and I know it's definitely a new nuanced conversations. More of them are happening, I think, with women, especially coaches in this industry, but looking at the diet after the diet, that's very important.
Hey, Pascal here. I just wanted to take the moment to talk about our membership site. Inside, you'll find a thriving forum, an extensive exercise library, courses, presentations, and research reviews. All I need you to do is hit the link in the description below and sign up.
Yeah, I think actually something Laurin kind of touched on there, and I think that was something maybe I skipped ahead when I was like, okay, so what's the first thing we look at? Like calorie deficit for fat loss. And now I'm like, well, actually, a lot of people aren't in a position to go to that step yet. So I don't know. I'm gonna pass it to Hattie because you haven't said anything for a little bit. In terms of when a client comes to you, a female, she wants to lose fat, what are you looking at to kind of identify, are you actually ready for this?
Is this for competing or is this just general fat loss?
Let's do either or do both. Do a general and then do a competitor.
So something that I get my girls to do is obviously information is really important. So the more information, the better, rather than just look at their metrics, but their dieting history. So if someone's come to me and they've been chronically dieting for a period of time and they still have a lot of body fat to lose, I'll often do a maintenance phase for 2 weeks first and then reset all their hormonal levels, get their food up a little bit and sometimes extend it for a month before I go back into a fat loss phase with that client. Because if they've been dieting and often they've come to me because they've been dieting, but they're not successful. So like something we just touched on before with the girls is relationship with food, not very good. All or nothing approach, clean eating, and great Monday to Friday, terrible over the weekends, possibly not even tracking their food very well or using an old diet plan from someone that's given it to them or their previous competition. Like a lot of girls, I don't know if you girls have noticed, but they go back to their old comp prep diet and want to do that as their diet for fat loss again, which doesn't work, especially when it hasn't got this really demanding external goal at the end. The thing about competition prep is it really brings out the crazy in people. And so they can do really crazy things. And that's often a lot of exercise on very low calories. So first thing is to look at their metrics and look at their goal. What's our time frame? Is that realistic? What's been their rate of fat loss prior to that? Have they been successful? What's their current eating habits looking like? Put them up into a new maintenance phase because often it's lower than what it was previously. I get my girls to start tracking their macros. So I do flexible dieting within guidelines or tracking macros with guidelines. So we start to establish that. And then I'll establish a new fat loss based off their new maintenance, which gives me a better understanding of where they're actually at. So depending if they are lifestyle or if they're competition prep, we've got to check in with, hey, do you like an aggressive approach from the beginning? Or are you happy with more of a slow, steady approach to this first target that we're going to hit? And I think it's really important that you break things down for them, right? So it's like first milestone, tick. Second milestone, tick, especially if they haven't been successful in the past. So that's kind of how I would start looking at, okay, how are we establishing where they're going to start off with? Because often when they've come dieting and it's been a really,
traumatic,
it hasn't been a really successful diet, often their calories are way too low or the strategy is too restrictive in terms of, it's never sexy just to track your macros, which is bizarre to me because that's the sexiest thing I've ever done in my life. Like, I have the body I want. I have the life I want. I can eat out with my friends. I can drink on the weekends. I can get into competition shape. Like, I can do whatever I want tracking my macros. But for some girls, it's just still not sexy enough. It's still got to be keto. It's still got to be super aggressive. You give them 150 grams of carbs, they freak out. And depending on the individual, there's a lot of learning to do. And I'm going to kind of sink back a little bit to what the girls are talking about, but something that I'm big on is relationship with self and relationship with food, because at the end of the day, we can't escape ourselves and we're not escaping food. Like, we have to eat food, and we're living in this amazing portal that we have, this vehicle every single day for the rest of our lives. And so, yes, we have a goal of fat loss or building muscle, whatever the external goal is. But if this thing is not good and that relationship with food is not good, it's not going to be an enjoyable process, right? Coming from an eating disorder background with the girls, I'm blessed. I feel very grateful for it because I'm in the position I am today because I learned about myself, right? I learned how to track macros so that I could have freedom in food and I could develop a good relationship with food because I didn't want to call it good and bad, and I didn't want to call myself good and bad when I ate it. So that's something that I work with the girls on, because that relationship with self determines the relationship with food. It determines their outcome. It determines their goals. It determines, is this an ascending goal? Does it take them up the mountain, or is it a Band-Aid goal? Are they trying to minimize something? And I think that's also something to work with their clients, is like, why do you want this goal? Like, why? Where is it taking you? And a lot of girls get on stage to minimize a feeling, for that to be the reason they're following through the process. But life after competition, my girlfriend is going to be worse than what it was before you started. And that's like, sometimes I know girls would have to step in and say, look, this isn't the goal for you right now. Just where we're at, it's not for you. But maybe later on, when you've just established a good relationship with self, a good relationship with food, you've hit your first goal of fat loss or whatever it is. Okay, cool. Like, we hear their transformation through language, and then, we can set an ascending goal with them, and it might be to get on stage, or they might go, you know what? I actually never want to get on stage. I just thought I did. And what we think we want, we don't always want, but we just don't know any better.
And I think Holly said, and a lot of us, you see competitors, you see the bodies. And if you've never been in that body, I think we can all agree that being in contest shape looks great in some pictures, but you feel like the Walking Dead, right? Like, it's not a feeling that I aspire to feel like on a daily basis, right? Looks good for a few pictures. That's about it. Not very functional.
1,000 pictures, 1,000 every day.
People don't know what that feels like. They just see it, right? And especially with photos, people actually, we all know you generally look a little bit bigger in photos than in real life, right? So you see this photo or these photos, 1,000, and you see like, oh my gosh, this person looks great. Like, they look healthy, but they're muscular. And they don't see like the gauntness, and they don't know how it feels, right? So what's really important is, competing is very, very hard on people's bodies, and especially women's bodies, and especially women who are not naturally lean. Again, there's always a bell curve to everything. So there's going to be some people who naturally are a little bit leaner. So maybe this isn't as challenging for their body because they don't have to change from their kind of settling point as much. There's going to be most people who are kind of in the middle. And then obviously there's people who carry more body fat naturally. Those people are going to have the hardest time doing competitions, and they're going to need the longest amount of time to recover from it. So I think that competing needs to come with more of a warning label, like, yes, this is fun, this is great. I'm all about supporting competitors. I competed for many years. I have many people who compete. But if you're doing this purely because you want to have abs and look like the girls that you saw at the Olympia, this is the wrong goal. We can do this and have other photo shoots are like the best things. Like, hey, you want to go on a vacation? You want to do a photo shoot? Like, actually, you probably look better in these pictures than you would on stage anyway. So like, go do this, like better spent money. But I have to encourage a lot of people, like, hey, are you competing to be a competitor? Do you want to be competitive? Because being competitive doesn't just mean doing a 12-week prep. It means before the diet, you're doing very particular things. during the deficit, you're doing very particular things. And after the deficit, you're doing very particular things. If you just want to have abs and look great in a bikini, let's do a photo shoot. We don't need to get to these levels of body fats that are very, very negative for your health. And the more that you do them, the more that these adaptations build. They kind of have a compounding effect from what I've seen. So it's just something that it needs to be more understood, because competing has gotten so popular, which is great. Again, it's a great sport. I think there's so many awesome things to it, but people need to understand what they're getting into. And these girls are really, really like, I'm all about personal responsibility. You have to understand what you're getting into, right? Like I do think that we can't just say, oh, I feel so sorry for them. No, like you should look into this a little bit, listen to podcasts, read about it, talk to competitors. But at the same time, the message from people in the space needs to be this, like competing is great, but it also comes with this warning label that says, these are all the things you need to do before and after, and understand this is the reality.
Yeah, it's definitely a specific lifestyle. I think, like you said, people have the assumption that it's like to switch it on and then it just stays on with minimal requirements. But there is a lot of work. In fact, I think even more work goes into the off season to, make the improvements and to make some changes to your body comp. But I did a video about this topic a few months ago. It was like looking at all of the negative outcomes of contest prep, which in some ways I felt a little bit hypocritical, because I was like, I've done this for 5 years of my life. I don't know whether I should be saying this, but the fact of the matter is, like you said, there is just not enough people kind of talking about both sides of that story. So, making sure that you're asking the right questions when someone comes to you with that as the goal is so incredibly important, and just educating them on everything and all the options. But I think a lot of women don't realize that when they get to that level of leanness, let's say it is the Olympia bikini model, you're not necessarily going to be happier in yourself. Just because you're now 10, 15 pounds lighter on the scale, that doesn't change. Like if there's other things in your life, other areas of your life that are not positive for you, whether it's your relationships, your finances, all the things that kind of make up who we are, being lean is not going to make those things better. You have to work on those individually. In fact, being lean makes a lot of these things worse. We've got disruptions to our mood, our frustrations, anger. We have significant levels of hunger. We have disruptions to our sleep. So not just falling asleep, but also more easily woken from sleep because we're trying to eat. We have changes in our hormones, hormones, our appetite regulating hormones. So our leptin levels, the more we diet, the longer we diet, the lower our body fat percentage, the lower that hormone is going to get. And then the stronger that signal is for you to be eating. Strength decreases, potential losses in lean body mass, depending on how you
sex drive.
Loss of sex drive, like forget about a libido, like you're salivating over the burger over there, not your boyfriend or your husband. Like, heck, forget about any kind of intimacy. And then, there's all of those, restrictions and limitations that you have on like your feelings of connection, like socially. You better be bunkering down to have pretty limited social life, or you're going to be making some pretty stout restrictions during the week in order to kind of facilitate a drink, like one cocktail or something. So, I think it's definitely glamorized. It looks fantastic. And I think all of us could probably say that the moments that we've been our leanest, we are probably all very, very proud of those achievements and how awesome, you looked for that particular show. But I think we've probably all matured enough in our careers to kind of go, you know what? Yes, that's hard work. Yes, that's fantastic. And when you see an impressive physique, you're like, damn girl, like you look so good. But the reality is, it's not something that you should be aspiring to have year round. Like you need to have a point in time where which you let your body recover, you let your metabolism, come back to a place that is going to permit you more flexibility with your calories. It can take up to 6 months or more for our appetite regulating hormones to return. I mean, there is a couple of studies, Laurin, I think you were probably involved in this one here at USF in Florida, where we kind of just did case by case, looking at individuals doing a reverse diet, under no specific instruction, but monitoring different metrics. So it might be hormones, it might be strength, it might be body fat percentage, basal metabolic rate, all those things. And at 6 months post show, for a lot of these people, their leptin had not returned to baseline but their body fat percentage was above where they started. So, you know, that is not a good situation to be in. Like, you're being
these were mixed competitors too, right, Holly? Like it wasn't, you know, there were some people who were more advanced, but this wasn't even like the most advanced person who got down to 3% body fat. Like this was somebody, like there were some people who just, hey, I'm doing a show, you know? So imagine somebody who is at the peak level, right? You know, like you guys, when you're competing and people of that nature doing that. And, you know, you don't just get that lean once, you do it multiple times, you know what I mean? And you do it over multiple seasons if you want to be competitive, right? And, you know, there is a trade-off. If you want to be a competitive athlete, you're going to have to make trade-offs no matter what type of athlete that you are. Obviously with physique athletes, it's a little bit more on the hormonal and metabolic side, you know, obviously psychologically too, but, you know, we're going to take more of a hit there. Whereas, you know, somebody else who's traveling 300 days out of the year, that's a thing that they do for their sport. So you have to make sacrifices for the sport. So it's not to say like it's this negative thing. And, you know, Holly, I know you said like, I feel bad saying this, and it's like, no, like, it's just the reality. Like, it doesn't mean that you're never going to compete again. It just means like here we have to be realistic with what is going on, and it happens to everybody. And obviously the leaner that you get, the more of these adaptations that you see, and the longer that you're leaner and the more seasons that you're that lean, they all start to build up, and everybody has a different resiliency. I mean, I think we all know people who compete seemingly all the time, who stay super lean seemingly all the time with relatively low issues. But at some point, even those people will run into problems. It might be a longer trajectory for them, but if you're always trying to stay super, super lean and never really giving your body time off, after a few cycles of that, it's just like, hey, I'm done. And then that's when we run into, you know, your body not responding to seemingly anything. You know, your hormones are all out of whack. You seem to be gaining body fat like by the month. Your digestion is wrecked. Your sleep is awful. And you're like, I don't understand. I'm heavier than I've ever been. Like, why aren't things back to normal? And it's like, that's where sometimes it's just a time component too.
That kind of ventures nicely into the reverse dieting topic, actually. I don't know whether you guys want to talk about that. Have we completely exhausted this, or are we good to move on?
I think we can move on. I was just going to say, in terms of before you start the diet, I really like the differential between someone just starting a fat loss phase versus like contest prep that you made. In that contest prep is just, there's a heck of a lot more to it.
It's multi-phase, right? It's multi-phases.
Yeah. And like, you need to know what you're letting yourself into, essentially, with not just that dieting and how you feel then, but also the post show. Whereas if it's just a general diet, well, it's just a case of, okay, do you tick the boxes of good relationship with food? You're not on silly low calories, doing loads of cardio, like you're healthy. Cool, we can go into it. Hi guys, Steve here. Just wanted to take a moment of your time to remind you of our online coaching service. At Revive Stronger, we pride ourselves on providing personalized service that will take your physique and knowledge to the next level. If you're interested, check the description and sign up. I don't know if before we touch on the kind of reverse diet period after a contest prep, you guys all sounded like you use Refeeds, which I find really interesting. I had a roundtable on Refeeds not that long ago, and it seems like most competitors use Refeeds, even though the evidence in terms of like scientific evidence, there isn't tons. There is some promising evidence. So I don't know if you guys have all found really positive experience of Refeeds, if you use them with some people, not others, and I guess more so in a contest prep scenario. I don't know if, Laurin, you want to start on that one?
Yeah, so there is a lot of benefit for certain clients. I would say most clients can use Refeeds. I would say that I do have a handful of people who are just a little bit more stubborn, and we have to be a little bit more aggressive, like I said, for a while, and then we can kind of add them in as they're responding. And only at the end do they really respond well to these Refeeds. But I would say that the majority of clients are going to be able to keep Refeeds in, or at least some kind of like high calorie day, every once in a while, because it really does help with obviously, planning, hey, I have this higher calorie day. It can help a lot with training, whether it's that day or the subsequent day or both days. It can have, I have a great night's sleep after this, etc. The problem with literature, and I love obviously science, and we all try to use science as the backbone of stuff, but it's really, really hard to do research with the types of people that we're trying to discuss right now. Think about it. The reason there's not a lot of research on physique athletes is because most physique athletes don't want their diet in the hands of somebody else, right? They don't want even the top people who we all know and trust, like, we're like, I want to do my own thing, right? Because ultimately you're looking out for your own timeline, you're looking out for your own fat loss. And if you're not responding and you can't make changes because of a study, like it's just not going to work. So that's often why there are these case studies and we can follow people, but it's really hard to have like large, robust data sets with people who are getting super, super lean, because you can't all put them on the same program. And that's why, you can do a lot of literature with, general population for fat loss and, make some extrapolations. But I think the beauty of it is, okay, is this possibly helpful? Yes. Is this harmful? Probably not. So let's try it and see if it works for somebody. That's kind of how I think that most coaches use these types of things. Some people, again, some people who are naturally need more calories, right? Or they just get really, really lean, really, really quick. They might need 3 refeeds in a week, right? Other people, they might not get a refeed for 3 weeks. And it's just because they hold on to things harder. Some people don't respond to carbs as well as other people, and some people actually do better when they have a little bit higher fats versus carbs. I would say that most people are going to do better with moderate fats, higher carbs on refeed days in particular. But again, there's always exceptions. So that's why it's hard. There is some promise in the literature, and it's really exciting that we're getting there and we can even do those types of studies. But I think the best thing that coaches can do is go, okay, is this if something's not harmful and it might have a benefit, we just have to have a nuanced approach. And you have to have a long enough timeline with somebody to try these things. If somebody comes to you and says, hey, I got to get ready for the show. Again, that's where the conversation, how we've all kind of discussed, you need to have a timeline like pre-contest prep with this client. I would never just take on somebody for a contest prep if I didn't know their body, or they didn't have a very long history of knowing exactly what they were doing, and they were doing all of the right things just without me as a coach, and they were experienced and all this stuff. Like, even then I'd be like, it would be tough, but it's generally speaking, most people are going to need a few months with a coach beforehand. And then you can see how the person tolerates food. But ultimately, you're only going to know how they're tolerating these things when they're in it. So I think that refeeds are really awesome. I know that, everybody has a different way that they like to approach it. Some people, I know for me at least, I always used to feel better the day after a refeed. So I would, especially when I was really lean. So I would, of course, train on the day of the refeed, but really make sure that I had an awesome training day or a harder training day actually the day after, because I'd wake up and like actually feel good for you. Like, wow, I don't feel like a total piece of shit right now. And you'd go and train, and then it's like, okay, I got one good session this week. That's of course really, really lean. But so everybody can kind of have their own thing that works for them. But I do think that refeeds are awesome, and you just have to know, again, understand the client. The one thing that people don't talk enough about refeeds, so in my opinion, and sorry, I'll let it go. I think that for some people, it can actually create some more issues. They get a little bit of food, they get that taste of it, and then their brain's like, okay, so the next day we're going to get this too, right? And then they're incredibly hungry and they're like miserable afterwards. So it's like, all right, if a client is giving me that kind of feedback, I don't care how good the presumed refeed might be. It's not worth the distress that they're going through that next day. Like, there's already enough psychological distress with dieting. We're trying to minimize those hurdles. So that's, again, where asking the client is really useful. How did you feel in the day of your refeed? How did you feel afterwards? And if they just, if it's not just one time, but if it's a repeated thing, hey, every time we have these refeeds, I feel ravenous after, and I actually overate. Like, that's the worst thing, that we're trying to avoid that at all costs. So refeeds are great for most people, but there are definitely subsets that I think it doesn't work as well.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, where you were discussing some of the negatives, I think it's important to kind of define what a refeed actually is. I think it's kind of, the term is used interchangeably with like a cheat day, or is it is it a diet break? Like, what is a refeed? So I think it is really important to kind of define it. And at the end of the day, I think people do use various approaches to refeed. Sometimes it might be as simple as taking their calories back to their maintenance calories. Like, maybe they were in a small deficit, they're losing at a good amount of weight each week. And then, they've got an event coming up. Okay, well, I'm going to take a refeed, which is technically just going back to their maintenance calories. Some people will use the word a cheat meal, and maybe it's completely untracked. And I think that is where it can kind of move into a bit of a gray area, because at the end of the day, if your goal is fat loss, In order to lose fat, you need to be in a deficit. So if you're having these refeed days completely untracked, which I know it's not the case for you, Laurin, like when you're doing refeeds with clients, I'm the same. You're giving them some pretty specific targets to hit, and hopefully it kind of keeps them, within reason, close enough to their maintenance calories or where they're at. But it's when it's kind of untracked and, they may end up doing significantly more harm than good because, all of the hard work that they did during the week to kind of get themselves into a deficit they might have been losing can be completely reversed, or at best it would be just reversed. And some people take it as far as going back into the negative. They've regained weight on that refeed or that cheat meal. So that is a really important thing to consider. Now, I know that I had somebody ask me a question recently, and it was like, oh, what happens if I just have 2 days at maintenance? Well, if you were following a set number of calories for, 7 days, but you decided to add in 2 higher calorie days, and maybe let's say they're like 400 calories higher than your normal maintenance calories. Essentially, all that is doing is it's just pushing back your, time to achieving that certain amount of weight loss in 7 days. It's now going to take you 9 days to probably get to that goal because you've had 2 days at maintenance. You could average that out over 9 days and you just find that your overall average calorie deficit for that period is just a little bit less. So I think that's important to kind of consider. The other thing I think is that these refeeds, there was a lot of hype going back several years ago about, if you have a refeed, it's going to increase your leptin levels, which is the hunger hormone. And, that's going to drive up your leptin and going to have a positive effect on your metabolism and help you to lose more fat and blah, 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 prime your metabolism. There was so much talk about that.
We wish.
But yeah, I wish. Unfortunately, leptin does, yes, respond to carbohydrate intake specifically, which is why, we as coaches probably encourage primarily carbohydrate consumption on those days. Also, because it's our primary and preferred fuel source for training. Resistance training is very much glycolytic in nature. You need carbohydrate. And there's some more studies that have come out on that recently too, which I'd love to talk about. But overall, after that initial response or rise in leptin, it responds to it doesn't respond to acute changes in energy balance. It responds to long-term changes in our energy balance. And so in the short period of time that you might have caused your leptin to come back up in response to a refeed or a high calorie cheat day, it's very quickly going to go back down because it responds to long-term changes in energy balance and long-term changes to your fat mass, not so much in an acute situation. So that kind of myth has been squashed. So I think to talk on what Laurin was talking about before, it can be useful from the sense that, indirectly, it may have a positive effect on one's ability to train better. So if you've got a really hardcore session the next day, maybe jumping up and putting some more of those calories on during your training sessions, you might get a better performance. And it's actually changed a little bit of the way that I structure my eating behaviors now. I know that previously I might do a little bit of kind of carb backloading towards the end of the week. So I would train in a greater deficit because I might have had a social event or something on the weekend where I wanted to save up more calories to go and eat out, maybe have a cocktail, have a drink, whatever. And I wanted to have that caloric flexibility. But now, looking at some of the more recent research that's coming out on carbohydrate availability or glycogen losses during resistance training, I actually now prefer to have more of my carbohydrates during those heavy hitting training sessions because there is evidence that decreased glycogen levels are far more predominant than what we previously thought. There's a big drop off in our glycogen stores, specifically in the type 2 muscle fibers when we undergo resistance training. So that might have negative effects long term. If you're especially very lean on very low calories and you're trying to push really hard at training, and now we're seeing pretty big decreases or drop-offs in the available glycogen, well, maybe your performance is going to be affected. So, moving more of those carbohydrates back to the training to help ensure that you can hit your weekly training volumes and that your overall, ability to retain your lean body mass doesn't go down.
Awesome.
I love refeeds.
Is that your input there?
I've always used them. I love Refeeds for myself and clients, and it's actually more along the lines of psychological. Like knowing that I've got a high day coming up every couple of days, psychologically, I can do it. I can push it. Psychology is everything, right? Adherence to your diet, adherence to training intensity, like the stuff that we can do on low calories blows our minds really in a contest prep, and it's psychology.
Yeah.
So I personally like using Refeeds for the psychology side of things and the compliance.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's,
I want to add one more thing before we transition. Damn it, I did this twice. Sorry, I'm the only person doing it. I think one thing too that really does distinguish competition prep versus just fat loss, and something that we incorporate a lot, and I'm very, very hard in my stance on this, is I do encourage actual flexibility with people's diets. So I'm very big on untracked meals and untracked days for clients. And we set this up in the off season or any kind of non-dieting period so that they're actually comfortable going out. And I say, hey, go have an untracked dinner. It's a normal untracked dinner. It might fluctuate, in the amount, but it's never, oh, I had 100 calories or I had 2,000, right? We do all of that work before we're in a deficit, because you don't really ever build really good habits in a diet. You're kind of just maintaining what you've built beforehand. So for all of our clients, we do that regardless if they're a competitor or not in their off season. So they get really comfortable with that. And then if somebody particularly is not in a contest prep, they're just in a fat loss phase, I will really try to encourage, like, hey, instead of a refeed, like, let's have one untracked dinner. Here's targets beforehand, and then you go have an untracked dinner. And for people who are not on a specific timeline, like, yes, they might have a timeline, but it's not as aggressive as like the competition timeline. Maybe they're not progressing as fast, but if that's going to work better for them, again, for the adherence and the psychology behind it, and they are able to enjoy that, then I'm all for it. If somebody's like, no, I'd rather have a refeed, I'm like, okay, like a structured refeed. Okay, cool. So that's kind of where we can play in the, the non-competitor situation. And there's a lot more, obviously, flexibility there. When people are committing to a contest prep, it's like, listen, we're trying to be as optimal as possible. And, we always want to be optimal, but again, you have to look, okay, like what's optimal and what's practical. So for a non-competition client, sometimes practicality, it wins over optimization. Contest prep client, like, listen, this is what you signed up for. Like, we have to be on point.
That's what separates them.
Exactly.
That's what separates them.
So, the level of leanness that we're trying to achieve is very different. We have a specific timeline that you're getting on stage, in this bikini, like, we have to be ready. We have to be at a certain body fat and a certain look. So I think that that's really just what is different there. And again, that's where you have to have that expectation with people up front. Like, this is the expectation of what we're doing for a contest prep.
So I'm Steve Hall, founder of Revive Stronger and a coach of Revive Stronger.
My name is Pascal Laurin. I'm the co-owner of Revive Stronger and also a coach, of course.
Revive Stronger has probably been going solidly for 3 years, roughly about 3 years.
Revive Stronger, to me, it is becoming kind of my child, my foster child. It's the gathering and getting together of like-minded people.
We've been expanding the coaching team, which is helping us help more people, but each coach can only help a certain number of people.
Right now, it's all over the place. We have YouTube, we have Facebook, we have Instagram, but there isn't that community aspect behind that.
And so the next step for us is developing a membership site.
So basically, we want to create a family and a community that is then benefiting from another.
A really cool community for people within our little niche is going to be a website.
They will get early access to our podcast.
You can access us, ask us questions.
The community aspect, we have a forum there. You can ask questions, but also you can log your journey.
There's also going to be courses on there.
Courses, presentations on different topics. Discount of past seminar footage. We will log our journey as well. We'll start vlogging.
We're going to have documentaries.
Our entire athletic journey. Furthermore, they get access to an exercise video library.
The exercises that we love for hypertrophy and maximizing hypertrophy, we're going to go through those in depth, telling you how to execute them.
We kept them concise and also mobile friendly so that you can watch them in between your sets.
I'm super excited to grow this community. The amount of value that we're going to be delivering is huge. And I'd love you to be part of it.
You will get so much out of that.
I'll see you inside.